Hey, welcome back to the series where we have been building an application with Qwik that incorporates AI tooling from OpenAI. So far, we've created a pretty cool app that uses AI to generate text responses as well as creating images. And there's just one more thing we got to do. It's launch time. That's right. In this video, we are going to deploy our application to a standard VPS. Now, I'm going to be deploying to Akamai Cloud Computing Services, formerly Linode, but the steps should work with any VPS provider. So I hope you're ready. Let's do this. Before we actually launch the project, there's some things I want to do first. A couple of them are optional, a couple of them are required, but I want to add a little button here that'll pre-fill these text areas with some example opponents so that people can come in without necessarily having to have an idea and just have some silly options to choose from. I also want to add a little disclaimer that, this app is built with AI, so it has a couple of little quirks and wonky things about it. And then I think it'd be a cool idea to include a shout out that, I made it and it's hosted by Akamai, and we'll have a little link to a promo for $100 of Akamai cloud computing credits. So I'm gonna do that first, and then we'll work on the deployment. So going into our application, let's start by adding the button that I was talking about. Okay, so in the component, I'm going to scroll all the way down to the template where we have the submit button here. And I'm just going to duplicate that for now because I know we're going to need two buttons. And because they're next to each other, I want them to be sort of side by side. So we're going to say this is not going to be just a div anymore or display of block. This is going to be a display of flex. And I want to have a gap of 4. Okay, now here, although with this first button, we can leave the type of submit. This is optional because the default button type is submit. Here we want to be explicit and set the type to button because we don't want clicking this one to submit the form. Next, we'll get rid of that. And then we can get rid of this. I am going to leave the SVG there because my thought is we'll have something like this. Looks pretty good. So then you can click this. I'm going to replace this icon, and I want to have it with something that's like a random selector. So instead of the alt text being loading, this is going to say pre-fill random fighters, something like that. Okay, so now we need to replace this icon, and we have a really handy setup for working with icons. So I'm going to go to icons, and I'm going to search for random. Control Enter to search the entire library. And then we have all these to choose from. And I kind of like this little card. Well, maybe this mystery box. No, I'm going to pick the cards. Sure. We're going to copy the SVG symbol. I'm going to close that and go into my SVG component. And we're going to update our definitions here. So we're going to add one called icon random, I think. And then we will paste in the symbol, that we copied. And then I just need to make sure that this key matches this ID. So the key is what's going to be used to tell TypeScript what options are available, but the ID is going to be the actual thing that tells the HTML markup what the SVG should be. So close that. Yeah, that's right. Actually, we forgot to do one thing. We have to actually change it here. So now instead of icon spinner, we have icon dash, and we have random as the option. There you go. There we go. How about that? That's pretty cool. And then I'm going to add one more little touch here that for visual users, they might want to hover over that and see something. So we're going to say a title equals just feeling lucky. Okay, so now hover over that, feeling lucky, bam. Now we have to make it actually work. So I want to have a click event listener for when this button is clicked for it to do something. So we're gonna start with just adding the event listener. So on click, and we're gonna call this pick random fighters, something like that. It's not defined yet, so we have to define it. So we're gonna go up into our component. I think I'm just gonna put it down here at the bottom, and we're gonna say const pick random fighters is going to equal. Once again, this should be familiar. We do the $sign parentheses, and then we can put There we go. And then we can put our event handler in there. So I don't think I need access to the event. I just want to execute a function. And inside of the function, what are we going to do? We are basically going to assign random fighters to the state dot opponent1 and state dot opponent2. So let's just start with that. Let's say state dot opponent1 is going to equal, for now we'll just do Bigfoot, and state dot opponent2 is going to equal Nessie. So let's see if this works. Click that, boom. So now we just need to actually implement randomly selecting these. And for this part, I'm just going to be copying and pasting from a list that I've already created. You can use your own list, or you can go ahead and go to the GitHub repo and copy the file if you want. So just next to this file, I'm going to create a file called fighters.js. And I am going to export default this list of fighters that I've created. It's an array where we have mythological, cryptids, fantasy, sci-fi, people, animals. Should be a fun list. Now I'm going to import that list of fighters so we can actually work with it. So we're going to come in from, let's say here, I'm going to import all fighters from /fighters.js. So once we have these fighters, we need to implement actually randomly selecting them. So I'm going to go down to my component where I was working. Here it is. And now the tricky thing is we essentially want to select a random fighter. We want to select 2 random fighters from the list, but we want to make sure that there's not a chance that we accidentally select the same fighter. So what I'm going to do is actually duplicate this array. I'm going to say const fighters equals, and then we'll just do a shallow clone of the array. Whoops, there we go. And then I have one that I can modify. And if I modify this one, I can basically pluck one fighter out and leave this as a mutated array. And then I can pluck the second fighter out and know that we won't have any sort of conflict. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to say const index1 is going to equal math.floor. And then we'll do math.random times fighters.length. There we go. That should give me a random index between 0 and the length of this array. Then what we can do is say const fighter1 is going to equal something. And again, what I want to do is essentially pluck fighter1 or pluck an item from this list at this index. But I don't just want to grab the value. I want to actually mutate this array such that the item is removed from the array at the same time. So we can actually do that. Let's do an example in the console. So I'm going to say const array equals, and we'll do 1, 2, 3. And then we can use splice to say, let's see, ar.splice. And the way splice works is it asks you at what index do you want to start. So let's say at the second item, we'll take out, so that's 1 represents the index of the second item, and then it asks us which number of items we want to delete. So if we want to remove one item from the list, we can do that. So array.splice 1, 1. And then what happens when I submit this is we're going to get an array back. So this actually returns an array with the item that has been deleted. So now we can see array.splice returns the number 2. And if we look at array, we can see that it is left with the number 1 and 3. So this effectively does what we want. So we can say fighter1 is going to equal fighters.splice, and then we want to provide the index, which we have as index 1. And then we want to provide the number that we want to delete, which is just one item. And that's going to return an array. So I can either grab the first item in that array, or I can actually destructure this call and say fighter1 is destructured from the array that is returned when we call this splice, and that of course is going to mutate the fighters array, which means that from here we can say const index2 is going to equal essentially this same exact line, because now we're working with the mutated array. And of course, this is probably a good one to turn into a utility function, but I'm not going to do that today. But this does mean that I can say const fighter2 is going to equal, and now we don't have to do this splice. We can just randomly select an item from the array because we don't need to mutate the array. So now we can just say fighters at the index 2. Cool. So that gives us fighter1 and fighter2, which means I should be able to come here and do that and replace that with 2, fighter1, fighter2. And let's see if this works. All things lucky. Boop. Hey, look at that. We got a basilisk versus Sherlock Holmes. We do it again. We got Bahamut versus a goblin. We do it again. We got a ninja versus Cthulhu and Zeus vampire. Here we go. What are we going for? We're going to do a Viking versus a dragon. We're going to tell that, or ask it to tell us. And there we go. Of course a dragon is going to win, but I got to see. And here you go. Really funky looking dragon, funky looking Viking, pretty epic background. Looks like he's got a little buddy for some help on his back. So I don't know, kind of an unfair fight if you ask me. Okay, one more thing we need to do here is we probably want to reset the state of the app when someone clicks this, because if I click it again, we can see that we still have a winner selected. We still have the text here, but we are changing these inputs. So let's implement that as well. Pretty simple. Let's just do it at the beginning. State dot, and we'll say text is reset, and same with the winner. We'll reset that, then we do our logic, then we assign it. Looks good to me. Okay, next thing I said I wanted to do was mention to people that are using the app that, hey, things might look a little wonky, like that dragon and Viking. So I'm gonna go down. This is just in the template somewhere here. Let's put it kind of here at the bottom. I'm gonna add a paragraph that says disclaimer, this app uses AI to generate content, so things may come out a little wonky sometimes. And I think I want to give that some spacing. So we're going to say class equals margin top and bottom like 10, and we'll say text center. So let's see what this looks like. Burp. That looks pretty good. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of close on larger screens. So I'm going to give it a little bit more text on a small screen. So we're going to say standard is that, and then at the small breakpoint, we're going to give it a margin top of 20. There we go. A little bit close on small screens and a little bigger on big screens. And that actually brings up a point that we didn't do the spacing for small screens on that. So let's fix that really quick. Here we go. No, where is it? My inputs. We only want at small breakpoint to go to a 2-column grid. So there we go. Looks good. Happy with that. Okay, last thing I want to do before we launch is I want to add a little bonus or a footer at the bottom of the page, and I want it across the entire app. So instead of just doing it in this page, I'm going to do it at the entire app level in the root component. So here we've got the head, we've got the body. Inside of my body, but probably before these things, I'm going to add a footer. And inside of my footer, we're going to have a paragraph that says built by, give a shout out to myself, /austingill.com, because I'm super vain. And we're going to say Austin Gill. There we go. Period. But it's also powered by, I'm going to give a shout out to https://akamai.com. We say Akamai connected cloud. Throw a period on there. And then we'll have another paragraph to spread some love, we're going to make this a whole link itself. If you go to https://linode.com/Austin Gill, that's going to give you a nice $100 in credit. So get $100 in free cloud computing credits, baby. All right, how's that looking? Not great because it's all there. Let's add some styles to that. We're gonna go in the footer. I'm gonna go class equals, give it some vertical and bottom spacing. And then we're gonna do the same thing at small screens, give it a little bit more. And then give it some space around so it's not right on the edge. And this is also going to be centered. So I think if I got that right, yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's go small screen. Nice, happy with that. All right, let's get this baby into production. So first thing we got to do is actually stop the dev server, because one thing that's special about Qwik is it's actually designed to run in multiple JavaScript runtimes. And that's handy, but it also means that our code as it isn't ready to run in production because Qwik needs to know what the runtime is going to be that it's going to run in order to know how to run the code. So for that, we're going to use some adapters, and we can access them with npm run qwik add. And this is going to prompt us with a whole bunch of different adapters and integrations and plugins that we can tap into. So in this case, I'm going to go down to the Node.js Fastify server because I'm going to be deploying my application onto a VPS running Node.js, and I like the Fastify server. If you see something here that you like, feel free to choose it, but if you're going to follow along with me and actually deploy the app along with me, then we'll pick this Fastify one. Now, the cool thing about this is it's going to prompt us with all of the changes that it's going to make. So it's going to modify a couple of files that are existing. It's going to create some new ones. It's going to install npm dependencies, and it's going to add some new scripts for us to run. So as long as everything looks good, we can choose between yes and no. I'm going to say, yes, this looks good. And it's going to run that script for us. Cool. So now if we go back to our code, we can see that we have some changes in our project. Now, I didn't make any of the changes to the package.json. We can see that those new dependencies are there and the new scripts. We can see that the README even got a little better documentation, which is handy. Little addition of a new vconfig file for building our server, as well as the entry file to our server. This is the change that I made. So let's get rid of that. That is a change that I made. And then this is another change that I made. And that's a change I made. Okay, outside of those, we also have this new entry, which is the server entry file for how to start the server-side app, as well as the configuration file for Qwik to instantiate the app in its specific runtime. So I'm going to apply all of these changes. I'm going to push these up so that they are available in the repo, because when we deploy this, I'm going to be pulling all of these changes down into the production server. So I'm going to say preparing for launch. All right, so let's push those up. Okay, sure, go ahead. With all that taken care of, we are actually done writing code, and we're going to shift to deploying our app in production. Now, if you are going to be following along with me, you can head over to linode.com. If you have not already signed up for an account, be sure to use my credits or my link to get some free credits. If you are not going to be using Linode, that's okay. We are still going to be following standard steps that should apply to any VPS service that you are using. But if you are using Linode, assuming you have an account set up, then you can log into your dashboard and go ahead and create a new instance. Now, I am going to go ahead and use Ubuntu just because that is the operating system I am most familiar with. I'm going to use the LTS version, and I'm going to select a region close to me because that's where, assuming my users are going to be. For now, it doesn't really matter which instance you use. You can even use a shared Nano 1 gigabyte if that is what you prefer. And I'm going to give this a label. We're going to call this versus. I'm going to tag it as an Austin creation, and I'll give it a password. In my case, I'm just randomly generating a password that's really long and secure. I don't need to know it because I have some SSH keys that I'm going to be using to log into my server. So with that all done, I can create my Linode, and this part might take a minute. So in the meantime, it's a good idea to grab this IP address and go ahead and point your domain name to this IP address. Now you don't necessarily have to, but it's going to be a lot easier if you already have a domain name set up. Once our server is finished provisioning, we can copy this SSH command and go into our terminal and SSH into our server. And once again, if you are not using SSH keys, there is a video that I show how to set those up if you would like to, but you'll probably be prompted for your password. I'm using SSH keys, so I just get right in, no problem. So the first thing we want to do on almost any server is to just update the existing software. Then we're going to install Git. Then I'm going to go to GitHub, Gil versus, and I'm going to clone this project. So I'm going to grab the HTTPS version, copy that, push that down, and then we're going to git clone. There we go. All right, and with that, we have the source code in our server. Next, I'm going to be running this application in a server that's running Node. So we need to install Node. I'm going to go, there's a project called NVM that I personally use and like, that allows us to manage a whole bunch of different Node versions. So we can go down to the install script and go ahead and copy that and paste it into our server. And then we should have NVM available. Of course, now if I type NVM, it's going to say the command is not found, and you can fix that just by exiting the server and getting right back into it. So now if we say NVM, we see we have it available, which means we can NVM install Node, and that's going to grab the latest long-term release version, I believe. And once we have Node, we also should have access to NPM, which means we can get into our Versus project and npm install the dependencies. Okay, and once our dependencies are installed, we have to build the project for production. So if you remember when we ran the npm run quick add and we added the Fastify server, it modified our package.json file. So we can look at that if we want, package.json. It added a couple of scripts, including the build and the build server script. So we're going to actually run those. We're going to do npm run build. And then this is going to run the build command. And for some reason, it builds the client just fine, but it always hangs on the server for me. So we're actually going to have to run the server build script as well. And that is done, should hang up. And then we can run npm run build.server. And that's going to use Vite to build the production version of the server code. All right, with that all set up, we should be able to run our application, but there's just one other thing that we need to be aware of. So if you remember in development mode, we created this env.local file that stored our environment variables and injected it for us. Now that's great for local development, but that actually won't work in production. However, we can take this code and we can inject it in our CLI as we start the application. So we can copy that and paste it, and then we can start the app with npm run serve. And we can see that that's going to call this node server entry Fastify, and then we can see that the application started running and started running the logs. However, if we go to our server's IP address and go to port 3000, because that is the port that Fastify is going to run on, it's not actually going to load. And that's because we need to expose the port that it's running on. And we also have this issue that the server is running as long as we're logged in and waiting for this app to run. But if we want to exit out of the server, we end up killing the running process. So a handy solution for that is to use a project called PM2, which is essentially a process manager that can run your Node.js applications and make sure that they're using multiple cores on the server that they're running on, or making sure that if it goes down, it comes back up. And in our case, it will run the process in the background while we exit out of the server. So we can work with PM2 by installing it via npm. So npm install as a global module PM2. So now we can run the same command, but instead of running npm run serve, I'm actually going to save that as in a comment. And right here, I'm going to say PM2 to start a process that's going to run npm run serve. If we do that, we can see that PM2 has done some pretty cool stuff. It opened up our application and it's running in the background. There's a lot of handy things from PM2, like PM2 being able to log things, and we can see what the server logs have been saying, as well as ensuring that if the server goes down and comes back up, PM2 will start the process up again when it starts up. So we can do that with PM2 startup, and that's going to generate a startup script for us. So now if the server reboots, PM2 will be back on it. Okay, so that's all well and good, but it still doesn't solve the problem of being able to access our server at our IP address and port 3000. We still don't see the application running. And for that, we're actually going to set up a reverse proxy using Caddy Server. Caddyserver server.com. So this is a really awesome server that I've been using for a long time. It's built on Go. It generates automatically the HTTP SSL certificates for you and handles rewrites and can serve as a very good reverse proxy, which is what we want to do today. So we're going to go to the documentation and look up how to install it. And we're going to scroll down, in my case, to the Ubuntu instructions. And I'm just going to copy these commands and paste them into my terminal. So I'm going to copy that one and paste it there. All right, so now that Caddy is installed and running, now we can go to our server's IP address and we can go to the root and we can see the default Caddy welcome page. Now, the last thing we're going to do here is we're going to use Caddy to do a couple of things for us. I've already pointed the domain name versus.austingill.com to this IP address. We just need to configure Caddy to use it. And once we've done that, we're going to have the domain name be fixed. Caddy is going to go ahead and provision an SSL certificate for us and make sure that it stays getting updated using Let's Encrypt. And we're also going to set Caddy up to be a reverse proxy so that our Fastify server running at port 3000 will actually be at the root domain name. So we can see a couple of commands here, or examples of what we can do, and we want to configure all of that in the Caddy file here. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to use nano, not mammo, nano, to edit that file. So down here at this port 80, I'm going to replace this with my domain name. If you have not done this, if you've not pointed your domain name, that will not work, but I'm going to point versus.austingill.com. It's already being pointed at my server's IP address. And then I don't necessarily want this to be a static host. So I'm going to disable that, and I'm going to I think I'll leave the file server. I actually don't know what that does, but I'm going to enable this reverse proxy. And we have the reverse proxy running at port 3000 when we're using Fastify. So I'm going to save that by hitting Control X and then Y and then Enter. Now we just need to reload the Caddy process so that it loads our new configuration file. And if I reload the application, it's dead. But that's okay because we didn't even want it running at the IP address anyway. What we wanted was to point it to versus.austingill.com, and there it is, boom shakalaka. It's our application that we just deployed, and it's got the new features that we added, and we can say, let's see, a Viking versus a king cobra, a rabid squirrel versus a werewolf. Okay, tell me how this one's gonna play out. And we say opponent 2, that's not what you were supposed to say, but it wins because it's a werewolf. And it possesses supernatural ability. Of course, a rabid squirrel would probably kick my butt, but doesn't stand a chance against a werewolf. So there we go. Another one of these wonky AI-generated images. This looks more like a were squirrel, but you know, that's what we get. Now, there's one more thing that I want to point out here, and that is if you didn't set up your application to connect it to a domain name and you did run it on some sort of node middleware, like in our case Fastify, then you might run into this problem where when you build for production, you're not able to access your app using the IP address, even if you have the Caddy server and reverse proxy set up. And that has to do with the way the production deployment works. The Qwik team by default will set up CSRF protection, which is really awesome to protect against CSRF attacks. However, by default, that requires checking the name of the origin server or the URL. So if you want to do that, all you have to do is set the check origin flag to false inside of your Fastify configuration file, which should exist inside of source plugins and then Fastify Qwik.js. And it should be inside of this create Qwik city configuration. You can just pass check origin and set that to false. Now, of course, you want to do this on the code base that's in the server. So you would either have to push this to Git and then pull it down onto your server, or inside of your server, you can modify the source/plugins/fastify file and go down to the correct line and then comma, check origin false, and Control X, Y, enter. And then even after you do that, you'd have to run the build server command one other time. And once you've built the server, you have to restart the PM2 process. But once that is all said and done, you should be able to copy your IP address, load it in the browser, and see your application running. All right, it's working. How cool is that? You can go onto the internet in your browser and go to versus.austingill.com and get some silly fights and responses from AI. I really hope that you enjoyed this series because I had a lot of fun building it. And if you want to support more series like this in the future, it means a lot if you hit that like button. It really gives a strong signal that I should continue doing this sort of things. Also, if you had any issues or want to leave any sort of feedback, please throw it in the comments section. And I would encourage you again to subscribe to our channel because we're always doing some cool stuff, and that's how you keep notified of the other cool videos that are going to be coming out. For example, I know that we finished this application and it's pretty freaking good, but I do have some ideas on ways that it could be improved, and I want to release a bonus video on it. I also want to keep you updated on some of the future videos that I'm going to be doing, including a series I'm going to be working on about caching. All right, I'll cache you later.